Serafina Thorne had thought the worst part of tonight would be walking home alone through the rain. She was wrong. When she crossed paths with 5 men who believed the world owed them everything, they decided to teach her what happened to girls who didn't know their place. They dragged her into a dark alley, shattered her ankle, and left her bleeding in the downpour. Serafina begged the shadow moving toward her not to hurt her anymore. But Marcello Lombardi had not come to hurt her. The Mafia boss, the man who had watched her from the shadows for months, had come to destroy every man who had laid a hand on her. It was past midnight in the city. The rain had started an hour ago and showed no signs of stopping, hammering the streets until the gutters overflowed and the alleyways turned to rivers of black glass. Serafina Thorne walked quickly, her thin coat pulled tight against her chest, her worn shoes already soaked through. She had just finished her shift at the diner on Lexington, the one with the cracked vinyl booths, and the owner who paid cash under the table because he knew she couldn't afford to say no. She had worked there for 11 months now, 6 days a week, always taking the closing shift because the tips were slightly better and she needed every dollar she could scrape together. Her apartment, a single room above a laundromat that smelled of detergent and mildew, cost more than she could comfortably afford. Tonight she had earned $31 in tips. It would not be enough for the electricity bill sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. When the rain began, she had stood under the diner's awning for 10 minutes, hoping it would ease. It didn't. Her phone was dead, she couldn't afford a cab, and the buses had stopped running an hour ago, 6 blocks. She had walked this route hundreds of times and never had any reason to be afraid. But tonight felt different. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As she turned onto a narrow street behind the old textile warehouse, she heard voices, loud, slurred, more than one. Serafina's hand slipped into her pocket, brushing her keys, the only thing close to a weapon she owned. A man's voice cut through the rain, cold and amused. "Well, well, look what the storm washed in." She turned. 5 men, expensive coats, polished shoes that had no business being in this part of the city. The one in front she recognized. Julian Knight, 28 years old, heir to the Knight development fortune. A man whose face appeared in society pages and whose reputation appeared in whispered warnings among the women who worked service jobs downtown. 2 weeks earlier, he had come into the diner with his friends, ordered nothing, and spent an hour making comments about her body, loud enough for her to hear. When she had finally asked them to leave or order something, Julian had laughed in her face and called her a name that still made her skin crawl. She should have known he would remember. "I don't want trouble," Serafina said, keeping her voice steady, even as her heart slammed against her ribs. "I just want to go home. You embarrassed me in front of my friends." Julian stepped closer, rain streaming down his face, his eyes bright with something cruel. "Little nobody waitress, talking to me like she matters." The other 4 fanned out behind him. Arthur Finch, Miles Sterling, Harrison Chase, Alistair Reed. Names that appeared on buildings and scholarships and charity galas. Names that meant immunity. "I think I have the right to refuse service," Serafina said, taking a step backward. Her heel splashed in a puddle. "Wrong answer." Julian's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and twisting it hard. Serafina screamed, tore free, and ran. She managed only a few yards before rough hands grabbed her from behind. Her coat ripped. A fist connected with her face. The rain and the street lights blurred into a single smear of pain as they dragged her into the mouth of a narrow alley that reeked of garbage and rust. She screamed, kicked, begged. The only response was laughter and the dull thud of fists against her body. Miles Sterling's shoe came down on her ankle with a crack that echoed off the brick walls. Serafina's scream tore through the night until her voice broke, the pain so blinding, so absolute, that for a moment she felt nothing else, only white-hot agony and the cold rain on her face and the terrible knowledge that no one was coming. They beat her until she could no longer move. Then they left her there on the wet concrete, her white dress torn and stained with mud and blood, her ankle twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Her body curled against the wall as the rain washed the blood from her split lip into the gutter. She thought she would die there, alone, in the dark, for the crime of being poor in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then came another sound. Footsteps, heavier, slower, deliberate. Serafina tried to open her eyes, her vision swimming with tears and rain and blood. A figure approached, tall and broad-shouldered, a dark red leather jacket gleaming wet in the dim light. She could see tattoos climbing his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. "Please, she whispered, her voice no more than a shattered breath. "Help me. I can't walk. Don't hurt me anymore." The shadow stopped. It knelt beside her. A hand, covered in ink, wearing a heavy gold watch and rings that caught the streetlight, reached toward her face with a gentleness that didn't match anything about him. The dim yellow glow from the distant street lamp revealed his features. Sharp jaw, dark stubble, rain dripping from the hard line of his brow. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, widened as they swept over her broken form, and something terrible moved behind them. "Serafina!" His voice was low, rough, trembling with barely contained fury. "God, what did they do to you?" She knew that face, not from meeting him, never that, but from glimpses. She had seen him sometimes sitting alone in the back corner of the coffee shop across from the diner, or standing on the street corner when she walked home, always watching, never approaching. She had told herself it was coincidence. She had told herself she was imagining things. Marcello Lombardi. A name spoken in whispers throughout the city, wrapped in fear and legend and death. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. 5 men. Julian Knight, he... But the words wouldn't form, lost somewhere between the pain and the cold, and the overwhelming strangeness of this man kneeling before her in the rain. Marcello's eyes swept over her bruised body, her shattered ankle, the blood mixing with rainwater on the concrete. His expression hardened into something cold and absolute, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet in a way that was worse than shouting. "I'm taking you to a doctor. Right now. Hold on." His jaw tightened. "It's going to hurt." He lifted her in his arms, careful as though she were made of glass, his tattooed hands cradling her against his chest. Serafina cried out as pain lanced through her ankle, and she let her head fall against his shoulder, breathing in leather and rain and something warm beneath it. For a moment, there was nothing but the heat of the man carrying her through the storm, his heartbeat steady against her cheek, his arms unwavering. She should have been afraid. She knew who he was. She knew what he was. But all she felt was something she hadn't felt in years, something so foreign, it took her a moment to name it. Safe. She felt safe. And somewhere in the part of her mind that wasn't drowning in pain, she understood that Marcello Lombardi, the man everyone feared, the man whose name made powerful men go pale, was about to make 5 privileged sons wish they had never been born. If you have listened this far, thank you for sharing your time and your heart with us through every beat of this story. And if something within you feels tight, stirred, or aching, perhaps you understand Serafina, someone who once believed she was invisible until a man emerged from the rain and saw her. Subscribe, like, and share this story with those you love, so we may continue telling moments that reach the deepest corners of the heart. Stories of broken things made whole, of darkness that gives way to unexpected light. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell us the city, the country where you are, so we may know how far the story of Serafina and Marcello has traveled, how many streets it has crossed, how many hearts in need of healing it has found, hearts like yours. Thank you for being here. We hope you will stay with us for what comes next. Marcello's arms tightened around Serafina as he carried her out of the alley, his steps heavy against the hiss of the rain and the distant wail of a siren. Somewhere across the city. She no longer had the strength to ask where he was taking her. The pain coursing through her body had blurred into one endless ache, part wound, part exhaustion, part something that felt dangerously close to hope. Marcello's face was still, unreadable, but in those gray eyes burned a fury so quiet and consuming that he did not need to speak. The very air around him seemed to thicken with it. He crossed 2 blocks, the rain soaking through his leather jacket, running down his jaw, and he never once adjusted his grip or slowed his pace. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running, headlights cutting through the storm. The driver, a thick-necked man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door without being told. Marcello placed Serafina gently on the leather seat, stripped off his jacket and draped it over her trembling body, then climbed in beside her. The car moved through the empty streets, past shuttered storefronts and flickering neon signs, turning finally onto a quiet block where a narrow brownstone stood, its windows dark, its brass nameplate bearing only a number. Marcello carried her inside, and within minutes, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and steady hands appeared, already pulling on surgical gloves. The doctor looked at Serafina, then at Marcello, then at the quiet storm brewing behind Marcello's eyes. He did not ask questions. He simply said, "This way." And as Serafina was carried deeper into the building, into warmth and light and the promise of someone who would put her broken pieces back together, she heard Marcello's voice behind her, low and certain, speaking to someone on the phone. 5 names: Julian Knight, Arthur Finch, Miles Sterling, Harrison Chase, Alastair Reed. I want everything: addresses, schedules, who they love. A pause. By morning. The line went dead, and Serafina understood, with a clarity that cut through even the pain, that tonight was not an ending. It was the beginning. Serafina woke to the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of a machine she couldn't name. Her eyelids felt weighted. Her body felt foreign, wrapped in dull aches that pulsed beneath something softer. Medication, she realized. Whatever they had given her had turned the sharp edges of her pain into something distant, something she could almost observe rather than feel. She was lying in a bed, clean sheets, warm blankets. A pillow beneath her head that smelled faintly of lavender. This was not a hospital. The room was small but elegant. Dark wood paneling, a single window with curtains drawn against the gray morning light, medical equipment arranged neatly beside an antique dresser. It looked like someone had converted a study into a recovery room. Her ankle was elevated, wrapped in a thick cast that ran halfway up her calf. She stared at it for a long moment, and the memories came flooding back. The rain, the alley, Julian's face twisted with cruelty, the crack of bone that had stolen her scream, and then him. Serafina turned her head. Marcello Lombardi sat in a leather armchair beside her bed, still wearing the same dark clothes from the night before, though his red jacket hung over the chair's back. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing the full sprawl of tattoos that climbed his forearms. His head was bowed, eyes closed, one hand resting on the arm of the chair. He looked almost peaceful, almost human. But even in stillness, there was something coiled about him, a tension in his shoulders, a furrow between his brows that suggested his sleep, if it was sleep at all, was not restful. She must have made a sound because his eyes opened instantly, gray, sharp, immediately alert. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcello leaned forward, his voice rough from the night's silence. "How do you feel?" Serafina swallowed. Her throat was dry, her voice a rasp. "Like I got hit by a truck." A pause. "Why am I here?" "Because the men who hurt you have connections to every hospital in this city." His jaw tightened. "Dr. Marchetti is the only one I trust." "And you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why did you stay?" Something flickered behind his eyes, something old and wounded that he buried before she could name it. "Because no one should wake up alone after a night like that." Serafina held his gaze, searching for the lie, the angle, the hidden motive. She had learned long ago that kindness from powerful men always came with a price. But Marcello only watched her, waiting, as if her silence was something he understood. Finally she whispered, "What happens now?" Marcello's expression hardened into something quiet and absolute. Now you heal." He rose from the chair, his full height casting a shadow across the bed. "And I handle the rest." He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back. "You're safe here, Serafina." "I'll give you my word." The door closed softly behind him, and Serafina lay there in the pale morning light, heart pounding, wondering why the most dangerous man in the city had just made her feel, for the first time in years, like she mattered. Marcello had not intended to follow her that night. He had been sitting in his car 3 blocks from the diner, watching the rain sheet across his windshield, telling himself this was the last time. Months of this. Months of positioning himself in coffee shops and on street corners just to catch a glimpse of a woman who didn't know his name. It was obsession. It was weakness. It was everything he had trained himself never to be. But there was something about Serafina Thorne that he couldn't explain, couldn't rationalize, couldn't kill, no matter how hard he tried. She reminded him of someone he had failed a long time ago. When she left the diner and started walking through the storm, he told himself he would just make sure she got home safe. That was all. He would watch from a distance, the way he always did, and then he would drive away and forget her. Then he heard her scream. The sound split the night open, and something inside Marcello split with it. He was out of the car before he knew he was moving, running through the rain, his heart slamming against his ribs with a violence he hadn't felt in years. He found the alley. He saw the 5 figures disappearing around the corner, laughing, adjusting their coats like they had just finished a business meeting. And then he saw her, crumpled against the wall, white dress torn and streaked with mud and blood, one ankle bent wrong. Rain washes over her like the sky itself was weeping. Marcello's vision went red, but he didn't chase the men. Not yet, because she was still breathing, still trembling, still whispering words he couldn't hear until he knelt beside her, and the world went quiet. "Help me. I can't walk. Don't hurt me anymore." At that moment, Marcello Lombardi, who had killed men without flinching, who had built an empire on fear and silence, felt something crack inside his chest that he thought had died years ago. He made her a promise then, silent, sacred. Never again. Now, 12 hours later, Marcello stood outside her door with a tray of food he had prepared himself. He felt ridiculous. He owned half the city's waterfront. He had men who could bring her anything she wanted. And here he was, carrying toast and soup like a servant, hesitating at a door in his own safe house. He knocked once and entered. Serafina was awake, propped against the pillows, her dark hair still damp from the compress the doctor had applied. She looked fragile in the morning light, but her eyes, when they met his, held something stronger than her body suggested. "You didn't have to do that," she said, watching him set the tray on the bedside table. "You need to eat." "I mean stay, Canesi." Her voice was quiet. "All night. You didn't have to stay." Marcello pulled the chair closer and sat, forearms resting on his knees, close enough that she could see every scar, every tattoo, every fracture line the years had left on him. "Yes," he said. "I did." Serafina studied him, and for a moment he felt stripped bare in a way no enemy had ever managed. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me." Marcello was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough at the edges. "I knew someone like you once, a long time ago." His jaw tightened. "I wasn't there when she needed me. I won't make that mistake again." The words hung between them, heavy with history he wasn't ready to name. Serafina didn't push. She simply nodded, something shifting in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but the first fracture in the wall she had built around herself. "Eat," Marcello said, softer now. "Then rest. You're safe here." He rose to leave. "Marcello." He stopped at the door, glancing back. Serafina held his gaze, her voice barely above a breath. "Thank you." 2 words. Small and trembling and utterly sincere. Marcello nodded once, something warm and unfamiliar flickering behind his ribs. Then he stepped out and closed the door gently behind him, already composing the list of 5 names in his mind. They would pay, every single one, but first he would make sure she healed. 3 days passed in the brownstone. Serafina slept, woke, ate what Marcello brought her, and slept again. Dr. Marchetti came twice daily to check her ankle, change her bandages, and murmur instructions she barely heard. The pain medication made the world soft at the edges, dreamlike, but through the haze, one thing remained constant. Marcello. He was always there, not hovering, not crowding, just present, reading in the leather chair, working silently on his phone, bringing her tea without being asked. He never demanded conversation, never pushed, never made her feel like she owed him anything for saving her life. It unnerved her more than cruelty ever could. On the 3rd night, Serafina woke to darkness and the sound of rain against the window. The medication had worn off, and the ache in her ankle pulsed hot and sharp. She shifted, wincing, and saw him. Marcello sat in his usual chair, but he wasn't reading. He was staring at the window, his profile carved in shadow, his expression stripped of the controlled calm he always wore. He looked haunted. "Marcello?" Her voice came out thin, rough with sleep. He turned. For a moment his guard stayed down, and she saw something raw beneath. Grief, old and deep, the kind that never fully heals. Then the mask slid back into place. "You should be sleeping." "So should you." Silence stretched between them. Rain tapped the glass. "You said you knew someone like me once," Serafina whispered. "Who was she?" Marcello didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, fractured at the edges. "Gianna. My sister." Serafina stayed still, barely breathing, afraid any movement would make him stop. She was 22, bright, stubborn. She wanted to be a teacher. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I was building my empire, busy, distracted. I told her I'd call her back." He paused. The rain filled the silence. 3 men followed her home from a bar, sons of a rival family. They wanted to send me a message. His hands curled into fists on the armrests. By the time I found her, she was gone, bled out in an alley 6 blocks from her apartment. Serafina's heart cracked. "Marcello? I killed them." His voice was flat, terrible. "All 3. It took me 2 weeks, and it changed nothing." She was still dead. I was still too late. He finally looked at her, and his gray eyes burned with something between fury and despair. "When I found you in that alley, broken, bleeding, whispering for help," his voice caught. "I saw her. I saw Gianna, and I swore to God I would not fail again." Serafina reached out. Her fingers trembled as they found his fist, still clenched on the armrest. She didn't speak. She simply held on, her small hand covering his scarred knuckles, offering the only thing she had: presence, witness, the quiet acknowledgement that his grief was real. Marcello stared at her hand like he had never been touched gently in his life. Slowly his fist uncurled. His fingers threaded through hers. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, something shifted, fragile, unnamed, but undeniable. 2 broken people, holding on in the dark. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning. The days folded into one another, soft and slow. Serafina learned the rhythms of the brownstone, the way morning light crept through the curtains at exactly 7, the creak of the 3rd stair when Marcello climbed it, the smell of coffee drifting up before she fully woke, always accompanied by a quiet knock and a tray left just inside her door. He never asked for gratitude, never lingered for conversation unless she invited it. He simply cared for her in 1,000 small ways that she had stopped believing anyone would ever bother to do. Fresh flowers appeared on her nightstand. White roses, replaced every 3 days. A stack of books materialized after she mentioned she liked to read. When she shivered one evening, a cashmere blanket appeared the next morning, draped over the chair as if it had always been there. Serafina didn't know what to do with kindness that expected nothing in return. By the 2nd week, she could sit up without wincing. By the third, she could hobble to the window on crutches Dr. Marchetti had provided. The view overlooked a small courtyard garden, overgrown but beautiful. She was watching the wind move through the ivy when Marcello found her there. "You should be resting." "I've rested for 19 days." She glanced back at him. "I'm going to lose my mind if I stare at that ceiling any longer." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. He crossed the room and stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the garden with her. "Gianna planted those roses," he said quietly. "Years ago. I never had the heart to pull them out." Serafina looked at the wild tangle of blooms below, then at the man beside her. This man who terrified cities, who had blood on his hands and vengeance in his veins, standing here talking about roses his dead sister had planted. "You're not what I expected," she whispered. Marcello turned his head, his gray eyes finding hers. "What did you expect?" "A monster." He held her gaze, unflinching. "I am a monster, Serafina. Don't mistake gentleness for goodness." "Maybe." She turned back to the window. "But monsters don't bring flowers. They don't make tea at 3 a.m. when they hear someone crying. They don't sit in chairs all night just so a stranger won't wake up alone." Marcello was silent. When she looked at him again, something in his expression had shifted, cracked open, just slightly. "You weren't a stranger," he said, voice rough. "Not to me. Not ever." That night, Serafina dreamed of the alley for the first time since arriving. She woke up gasping, tears streaming, the phantom crack of her ankle echoing through her bones. But before the panic could swallow her whole, the door opened. Marcello didn't speak. He simply sat in his chair, close enough that she could hear him breathing, steady and calm. "I'm here," he murmured. "You're safe. Go back to sleep." And somehow, impossibly, she did. 1 month after the alley, Serafina spoke their names for the first time. She was sitting in the garden courtyard, her casted ankle propped on a cushioned chair, morning sun warming her face. Marcello sat across from her, reading a newspaper he wasn't really looking at. Julian Knight. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled in her lap. Arthur Finch, Miles Sterling, Harrison Chase, Alistair Reed. Marcello lowered the paper, his eyes locked on hers, waiting. "I want to say them." Her throat tightened. "I've been afraid to even think them. Like saying their names would summon them back. But I'm done being afraid of sounds." She exhaled, shaky but deliberate. "They don't get to live in my head rent-free anymore." Marcello set the newspaper aside. He didn't offer empty comfort or tell her she was brave. He simply nodded, a quiet recognition of what it had cost her to speak. "Good," he said. "Hold on to that." That evening, Marcello left the brownstone for the first time in weeks. Serafina watched from the window as the black SUV pulled away on my disappearing into the amber glow of streetlights. She didn't ask where he was going. She already knew. In a warehouse on the south side of the city, Marcello stood before a wall, covered in photographs, documents, and red string connecting locations to names. Julian Knight, Arthur Finch, Miles Sterling, Harrison Chase, Alistair Reed. His lieutenant, a broad man named Dante, handed him a folder. "Julian first," Dante said. "He's the ringleader. The others will scatter once he falls." Marcello studied Julian's photograph, the arrogant smile, the expensive haircut, the eyes of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. "No." Marcello's voice was nice. "Julian last. I want him to watch his friends disappear one by one. I want him to know what's coming and be powerless to stop it." He pinned a red mark over Arthur Finch's address. "Start with this one. Tomorrow night." Back at the brownstone, Serafina did something she hadn't done since the attack. She stood, not with crutches, not leaning on furniture, just her own 2 feet, cast and all, trembling but upright in the center of her room. Pain flared through her ankle, her vision blurred. Every instinct screamed at her to sit back down. She didn't. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, but from something fiercer. Defiance. Reclamation. The first fragile bloom of the woman she was becoming. They broke my ankle, she thought. They don't get to break the rest of me. When Marcello returned hours later, he found her asleep in the chair by the window, a small smile on her lips. He didn't wake her. He simply draped the cashmere blanket over her shoulders and stood watch until dawn. 6 weeks after the alley, Marcello took her to the roof. The brownstone had a hidden staircase, narrow and winding, that opened onto a small terrace overlooking the city. Serafina climbed slowly, her healing ankle aching with each step, but she refused his offered arm. "I need to do this myself," she said. He walked behind her, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to let her believe she didn't need him. When she reached the top, the city sprawled before her, glittering towers, distant traffic, a sky streaked with violet and gold as the sun sank below the horizon. The wind lifted her hair, cool and clean, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Marcello stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching not the skyline but her face. "I come here when I need to remember the world is bigger than my sins." Serafina turned to look at him. The fading light softened his sharp edges, traced the tattoos climbing his neck, caught the silver threads in his dark hair she hadn't noticed before. "Do you regret them?" she asked quietly. "The things you've done?" "Some." His jaw tightened. "Not the ones I'm about to do." She knew he meant the 5 men. Arthur Finch had disappeared 3 days ago. The news called it a missing persons case. Serafina knew better. She should have been horrified. She should have felt something like guilt. Instead, she felt only a savage, secret relief. "I trust you." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, hanging in the space between them like a held breath. Marcello went still. His gray eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for the lie he clearly expected. He found none. "You shouldn't," he said roughly. "I'm not a good man, Serafina." "Maybe not." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "But you're the man who carried me out of the rain, who sat beside me every night, who made me feel safe when I thought I'd never feel safe again." Her hand lifted, trembling, and pressed against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart pounded, fast, unsteady, human. "I trust you," she repeated. "Not because you're good, because you're real." Marcello's control shattered. His hand cupped her face, rough and gentle all at once, tilting her chin up. For a moment he just looked at her, really looked, like she was something precious, something fragile, something he was terrified to break. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. "Tell me now, and I will." "Don't stop." He kissed her. It was not soft. I was not careful. It was months of longing and weeks of restraint and years of loneliness colliding in a single moment. Serafina's fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer, and she kissed him back with everything she had. Every fractured piece of herself she was learning to reassemble. When they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, breathing ragged, Marcello's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured. "Not for anything you're not ready for. Just stay. Let me hold you." Serafina nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes." They lay together in his bed, fully clothed, wrapped around each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Marcello's arms encircled her, strong and warm, his chin resting on the top of her head. Serafina pressed her ear to his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heartbeat. No words, no demands, just presence. Outside, the rain finally came, drumming softly against the windows, and for the first time since the alley, Serafina slept without dreaming of the dark. The last one fell on a Thursday. Marcello came home as dawn broke, blood washed away, but exhaustion carved deep into his features. Serafina was waiting in the kitchen, coffee already brewing, and when their eyes met, she understood without asking. It was done. All 5 men who had destroyed her in that alley, gone. Not missing, not disappeared. Erased, as though they had never existed to hurt her. She walked to him slowly, searched his face for regret or darkness, and found only a weary resolution. "Thank you," she whispered. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I would burn the world for you." "I know." She held him tighter. "But I don't need the world to burn anymore. I just need you." Spring came, and with it, transformation. Serafina enrolled in classes, design, art history, things that made her hands create instead of shake. She took walks without looking over her shoulder. She laughed at Marcello's dry humor, argued with him about movies, and cooked terrible pasta that he ate without complaint. Her nightmares didn't vanish, but they grew quieter, rarer. She learned to recognize her own strength, not the kind forced upon her by survival, but the kind she chose deliberately. Every morning she woke up and decided to keep going. That was power too. Marcello watched her bloom with something like wonder. "You're remarkable," he told her one evening as she sketched by the window, sunlight gilding her profile. "I'm just me," she replied, smiling. Finally. Marcello began to change too. He stepped back from the violence, delegated the darkness to men who thrived in it. He kept his hand in the business. You didn't leave that world completely, but he carved out space for something gentler. For her, for them, for the life they were building together. "Are you sure?" Serafina asked when he told her. "I don't want you to give up who you are." "I'm not." His fingers threaded through hers. "I'm choosing who I want to become." They moved to a house with a garden, not far from the city, but far enough that silence felt like a gift instead of a threat. Serafina planted flowers, riotous color blooming from dark earth. Marcello built her a studio, filled it with light. On quiet evenings, they sat together on the porch, her head on his shoulder, watching the stars emerge. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked once. "The old life?" "No." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "This is the only life that matters." A year after the rooftop, Serafina stood in that same spot. But she was different now, stronger, steadier, sure of herself in ways she'd never imagined possible. Marcello stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, and she realized something profound. He hadn't saved her. They had saved each other. Two broken people, building something beautiful from the wreckage. "I love you," she said, the words easy now. "I love you," he answered. "Always." Below them the city glittered, vast and indifferent. Above them the sky stretched infinite. And between them, finally, wonderfully, was peace.